What's up, you guys? Welcome back. Last episode of The Four Loves. We're going to be reading chapter 4, Eros. I think, my bad, this is chapter 5. Roman numerals, man, they always get me, bro. Like, what the fuck is a V, right? Am I right, guys? Come on. Thank you. I'll be here all day. So this chapter is about the same. It's a little bit shorter than the last chapter, but to me, hopefully, it is what the whole book is leading towards, you know? And it is eros. And a lot of, I think... So, eros is something that I've always been really interested in a way of just Greek mythology, Greek gods, because eros is the Greek god of erotic love, compared to oftentimes Cupid, and I think that I think that's where the quote that I read, and the quote that kind of got me interested in finding out who this author was and learning more about him comes from this chapter. And it's just, I'm interested to see what he views it. So without further ado, I feel like this intro was way too long. Let's just jump into it. By eros, I mean, of course, that state which we call being in love, or if you prefer, the kind of love which lovers are in. Some readers may have been surprised when, in an earlier chapter, I described affection as the love in which our experience seems to come closest to that of animals. Surely, it might be asked, are sexual functions bring us equally close? This is quite true as regards human sexuality in general, but I am not going to be concerned with human sexuality simply as such. Sexuality make part of our subject only when it becomes an ingredient in the complex state of being in love. That sexual experience can occur without eros, without being in love, and that eros includes other things besides sexual activity, I take for granted. If you prefer to put it that way, I am inquiring not into the sexuality which is common to us, and the beast of even common to all men, but into one uniquely human variation of it, which develops within love, what I call eros. The cardinal or animal sexual... The carnal or animally sexual element within eros. The animal or carnal... The carnal or animally sexual element within eros, I intend, following an old usage, to call Venus, and I mean by Venus what is sexual, not in the cryptic or rarefied sense, such as a depth psychologist might explore, but in perfectly obvious sense, what is known to be sexual by those who experience it, what could be proved to be sexual by the simplest observations. Sexuality may operate without eros or as part of eros. Let me hasten to add that I make the distinction simply in order to limit our inquiry and without any moral implications. I am not at all subscribing to the popular idea that it is the absence or presence of eros which makes the sexual act impure or pure, degraded or fine, unlawful or lawful. If all who lay together without being in a state of eros were abominable, we all come of tainted stock. The times and places in which marriage depends on eros are in a small minority. Most of our ancestors were married off in early youth to partners chosen by parents on grounds that they had nothing to do with eros. They went to the act with no other fuel, so to speak, than plain animal desire. And they did it right, honest Christian husbands and wives, obeying their fathers and mothers, discharging to one another their marriage debt, and bringing up families in the fear of the Lord. Conversely, this act, done under the influence of soaring and iridescent eros, which reduces the role of the senses to a minor consideration, may yet be plain adultery, may involve breaking a wife's heart, deceiving a husband, betraying a friend, polluting hospitality, and deserting your children. It has not pleased God that the distinction between sin and a duty should turn on fine feelings. This act, like any other, is justified or not by far more prosaic and definable criteria. By the keeping or breaking of promises, by justice or injustice, by charity or selfishness, by obedience or disobedience, my treatment rules out mere sexuality without eros on ground that have nothing to do with morals because it is irrelevant to our purpose. To the evolutionist, eros, the human variation, will be something that grows out of Venus, a late complication and development of the immemorial biological impulse. We must not assume, however, that this is necessarily what happens within the consciousness of the individual. There may be those who have first felt sexual appetite for a woman, then gone on at a later stage to fall in love with her, but I doubt that this is at all common. Very often what comes first is simply a delighted preoccupation with the beloved, a general unspecified preoccupation with her totality. A man in this state really hasn't leisure to think of sex. He is too busy thinking of a person. The fact that she is a woman is far less important than the fact that she is herself. He is full of desire, but the desire may not be sexually toned. If you asked him what he wanted, the true reply would often be to go on thinking of her. He is love's contemplative. And when at a later stage the explicitly sexual element awakes, he will not feel, unless scientific theories are influencing him, that this had all along been the root of the whole matter. He is more likely to feel that the incoming tide of eros, having demolished many sand castles and made islands of many rocks, has now at last, with a triumph seventh wave, flooded this part of his nature also. The little pool of ordinary sexuality which was there on his beach before the tide came in. Eros enters him like an invader, taking over, reorganizing one by one the institutions of conquered country. It may have taken over many others before it reaches the sex in him, and it will recognize that too. No one has indicated that the nature of the reorganization more briefly and accurately than George Orwell, who disliked it and preferred sexuality in its native condition, uncontaminated by eros. In 1984, his dreadful hero, how much less human than the four-footed heroes of his excellent Animal Farm. Before tousing, the heroine demands a reassurance. "You like doing this?" he asks. "I don't mean simply me, I mean the thing in itself." He is not satisfied till he gets the answer. "I adore it." This little dialogue defines the reorganization, sexual desire without eros. Wants it, the thing itself. Eros wants to be the beloved. The thing is a sensory pleasure that is an event occurring within one's own body. We use a most unfortunate idiom when we say of a lustful man prowling the streets that he wants a woman. Strictly speaking, a woman is just what he does not want. He wants pleasure for which a woman happens to be a necessary piece of apparatus. How much he cares about the woman as such must be gauged by his attitude to her 5 minutes after fruition. one does not keep the carton of cigarettes after one has smoked the cigarettes. Bro. Bro. That shit's so funny. What the fuck? Now Eros makes a man really want, not a woman, but one particular woman, in some mysterious but quite indisputable fashion. The lover desires the beloved herself, not the pleasure she can give. No lover in the world ever sought the embraces of a woman he loved as a result of calculation, however unconscious that they would be more pleasurable than those any other woman. If he raised the question, he would no doubt expect that this would be so. But to raise it would be to step outside the world of eros altogether. The only man I know who ever did this was Lucretius, and he was certainly not in love when he did it. It is interesting to note his answer. That austere Voluptuary gave it as his option that love actually impairs sexual pleasure. The emotion was a distraction. It spoiled the cool and critical receptivity of his palate. A great poet, but Lord, what beastly fellows these Romans were. The reader will notice that Eros thus wonderfully transformed what is par excellence a need pleasure into the most appreciative of all pleasures. It is nature of the need pleasure to show us the object solely in relation to our need, even our momentary need. But in Eros, a need at its most intense sees the object most intensely as a thing admirable in herself, important far beyond her relations to the lover's need. If we had not all experienced this, if we were mere logicians, we might boggle at the conception of desiring a human being as distinct from desiring any pleasure, comfort, or service that human being can give. It is certainly hard to explain. Lovers themselves are trying to express part of it, not much, when they say that they would like to eat one another. Milton has expressed more than he fancies angelic creatures with bodies made of light who can achieve total interpretation instead of our mere embraces. Charles Williams has said something of it in the words, "I love you. I am you." Without Eros, sexual desire, like every other desire, is a fact about ourselves. Within Eros, it is rather about the beloved. It becomes almost a mode of perception, entirely a mode of expression. It feels objective, something outside of us, in the real world. That is why Eros, though the king of pleasures, always at his height, has the air of regarding pleasure as a byproduct. To think about it would plunge us back into ourselves, in our own nervous system. It would kill Eros as you can kill the finest mountain prospect by locating it all on your own retina and optic nerves. Anyway, whose pleasure? For one of the first things Eros does is to obliterate the distinction between giving and receiving. Hetero, I have been trying merely to describe, not to evaluate, but certain moral questions now inevitably arise, and I must not conceal my own view of them. It is submitted rather than asserted, and of course open to correction by better lovers, better men, and better Christians. It has been widely held in the past, and is perhaps held by many unsophisticated people today, that the spiritual danger of Eros arises almost entirely from the cardinal element within it, that Eros is noblest or purest when Venus is reduced to the minimum. The older moral theologians certainly seem to have thought that the danger we chiefly had to guard against the marriage was that of a soul-destroying surrender to the senses. It will be noticed, however, that this is not a scriptural approach. St. Paul, dissuading his converts from marriage, says nothing about that side of the matter except to discourage prolonged abstinence from Venus. What he fears is preoccupation, the need of constantly pleasing, that is, considering one's partner, the multiple distractions of domesticality. It is marriage itself, not the marriage bed, that will be likely to hinder us from waiting uninterruptedly on God. And surely St. Paul is right. If I must If I may trust my own experience, it is within marriage as without. The practical and prudential cares of the world, and even the smallest and most prosaic of those cares, are the great distraction, the gnat-like cloud of petty anxieties and decisions about the conduct of the next hour, have interfered with my prayers more often than any passion or appetite whatever. The great permanent temptation of marriage is not the sensuality, but quite bluntly, to avarice. With all our proper respect to the medieval guides, I cannot help remembering that they were all celibates, and probably did not know what eros does to our sexuality, how, far from abrogating, he reduces the nagging, addictive character of mere appetite, and does not satisfy it. Eros without diminishing desire makes abstinence easier. He tends, no doubt, to a preoccupation with the beloved, which can indeed be an obstacle to the spiritual life, but not chiefly a sensual preoccupation. What's up, you guys? Sorry about that. I actually had a little break in between, and I changed clothes, and I had to do some other stuff, but let's finish off the chapter of eros. Theologians have often feared in this love a danger of idolatry. I think that they meant by this that the lovers might idolize one another. That does not mean to me to be the real danger, certainly not in marriage. The deliciously plain prose and businesslike intimacy of married life render it absurd. So does the affection in which eros is almost invariably clothed. Even in courtship, I question whether anyone has felt the thirst for the uncreated or even dreamed of feeling it. Ever supposed that the beloved could satisfy it? As a fellow pilgrim pierced with the very same desire, that is, a friend, the beloved may be gloriously and helpfully relevant. But as an object for it, well, I would not be rude. Ridiculous. The real danger seems to me not that the lovers idolize each other, but that they idolize Eros himself. I do not, of course, mean that they will build altars or say prayers to him. The idolatry I speak of can be seen in the popular misinterpretation of our Lord's words. Her sins, which are many, are forgiven her, for she loved much. From the context, and especially from the preceding parable of the debtors, it is clear that this must mean the greatness of her love for me is evidence of the greatness of the sins I have forgiven her. For here is like the for in he can't have gone out, for his hat is still hanging in the hall. The presence of the hat is not the cause of him being in the house, but a probable proof that he is. But thousands of people take it quite differently. They first assume with no evidence that her sins were sins against chastity, though, for all we know, they have been usury, dishonest, shopkeeping, or cruelty to children. And they then take our Lord to be saying, I forgive her unchastity because she was so much in love. The implication is that a great eros extenuates, almost sanctions, almost sanctifies any actions it leads to. When lovers say of some act that they might blame, love made us do it. Notice the tone. A man saying, I did it because I was frightened, or I did it because I was angry, speaks quite differently. He is putting forward an excuse for what he feels to require excusing. But the lovers are seldom doing quite that. Notice how tremendously, almost how devoutly, they say the word love, not so much pleading an extenuating circumstance as appealing to an authority. The confession can almost be a boast. There can be a shade of defiance in it. They can feel like martyrs. In extreme cases, what their words really express is a demure yet unshakable allegiance to the God of love. These reasons in love's law have passed for good, says Milton's Delilah. That is the point in love's law. In love, we have our own law, a religion of our own God. Where a true eros is present, resistance to his commands feel like apostasy. And what are really, by the Christian standard, temptations speak with the voice of duties. quasi-religious duties act of pious zeal to love. He builds his own religion around the lovers. Benjamin Constant has noticed how he creates for them. In a few weeks or months, a joint past which seems to them immemorial, they reoccur to it continually with wonder and reverence. As the psalmist recurred to the history of Israel, it is in fact the Old Testament of love's religion. The record of love's judgment and mercies towards his chosen pair up to the moment when they first knew they were lovers. After that, its New Testament begins. They are now under a new law, under what corresponds in this religion to grace. They are new creatures. The spirit of eros supersedes all laws, and they must not grieve in it. It seems to sanction all sorts of actions they would not otherwise have dared. I do not mean solely to chiefly acts that violates chastity. They are just likely to be acts of injustice or uncharity against our outer world. They will seem like proofs of piety and zeal towards eros. The pair may say to one another in an almost sacrificial spirit, "It is for love's sake that I have neglected my parents, left my children, and cheated on my partner, failed my friend at his greatest need. These reasons in love's law have passed for good." The votaries may even come to feel a particular merit in such sacrifices. What costlier offering can be laid on love's altar than one's conscience? And all the time the grim jokes is that eros, whose voice seems to speak from an internal realm, is not himself necessarily even permanent. He is notoriously the most mortal of our loves. The world rings with complaints of his fickleness. What is baffling is the combination of his fickleness with his protestations of permanency. To be in love is both to intend and to promise lifelong fidelity. Love makes vows unasked, can't be deterred from making them. "I will be ever true," are almost the first words he utters, not hypocritically but sincerely. No experience will cure him of the delusion. We have all heard the people who are in love again every few years, each time sincerely convinced that this time it's the real thing, that their wanderings are over, that they have found their true love and will themselves be true till death. This reveals his true status. He cannot himself be what, nevertheless, he must be to remain in eros. He needs help, therefore needs to be ruled. The god dies or becomes a demon unless he obeys God. It will be well if, in such case, he always died, but he may live on, mercilessly changing together, two mutual terminators, each raw all over with the poison of hate and love, each ravenous to receive the implacability, refusing to give, jealous, suspicious, resentful, struggling for the upper hand, determined to be free, and to allow no freedom, living on scenes. Read Anna Karenina, and do not fancy that such things happen only in Russia. The lovers' old hyperbole of eating each other can horribly near to the truth. And ladies and gentlemen, that marks the end of Chapter 4, Eros. In the next episode, we're going to be tackling in Chapter 5, Charity, which seems to be the last chapter of the Four Loves. And I'm excited. It is, we're almost done through this book. Look how much we have left. This is how much we have left. And, I am excited to do a book review. Things were really interesting, Eros, because he did bring a lot of religion into it, and it is nice to understand his perspective, because it's true that not a lot of marriages start off like with Christ first. So it's interesting to see his view on it. I can say that I can relate that love is a fickle thing. It comes and goes whenever it wants, but it's such a beautiful thing once you have it there. and I think it helps you grow as a person and develop more emotional intelligence, and it's good. So far, I would say that maybe the first two chapters I wasn't really digging it, but now I'm really digging it. I'm really starting to see what his view and what he wants to describe. Definitely wish that I had more of a context and understanding of his timeline, because he's mentioning a lot of books and literature that I haven't read before, and maybe it would enhance my reading experience with this. But that's that, and I hope you guys have a good one. See you guys later.